Pleasure to welcome you all this morning. We are very excited about this program and especially today's symposium and home tour, and happy that you all decided to join us. A few housekeeping things. The restrooms are on the opposite side of the building. You'll go out this hallway and to the left, and there is a hallway on the west side of the building where the restrooms are located. And then please, if everybody could, take a moment to silence their cell phones. Want to make sure we don't interrupt our panelists. And lastly, I just want to acknowledge all the people that helped make this project happen. We've been working on this project for years. It's been an ongoing effort for many years. But this year we have partnered with the Kern County Museum, the Arts and Humanities Department at CSU Bakersfield, and the Architectural Society of, or the Society of Architectural Historians Southern California chapter. And I need to make sure that we acknowledge Sian Winship, who has really led the charge here. And she will be guiding us through the symposium today, so you'll be hearing much more for her. But I have the privilege of introducing our fearless leader, the founder of Bakersfield Built, David Coffey.
Well, this is great to see this room like this with this many people for this topic of conversation. So I wanted to start out, how many people are from out of town? Just a show of hands. Wow. Great. All right. And then how many people that are from out of town have never been to Bakersfield? Great. Well, welcome. And let's see a show of hands of people who call Bakersfield home. Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. That's many more than the last time we did this 5 years ago. Predominantly, there were people from out of town, so thank you very much. So Bakersfield Built came out of an appreciation of the built environment, hence the name, and the buildings that are in Bakersfield. And a desire to share them not only with our local community, but on a national level and even with an international audience, which we have over the last, say, 15 years. We've hosted people from all over the world. And the driving force is really three-pronged. The idea is to identify notable buildings, educate others why they're notable, and then to celebrate them in the hopes that as a community we can preserve, improve, and cherish the history of these buildings for future generations. And that mission statement comes from work with Barbara Lamprecht, who you'll hear from. We did that about 15 years ago, Barbara, so thank you. Because I said, why do this? And we had to come up with a reason, I guess. I did want to thank our sponsors, Jean Tackett and Barbara Patrick, BFGC Architects. We have a couple of people from BFGC in the audience today, former, current, and later we'll see Frank Getzi, who is the G in BFGC. Crosby Doe Associates Real Estate from Los Angeles, AIA Golden Empire, and Trendway Office Furniture. And without their support, this certainly wouldn't be possible. Thanks. I want to thank three architects in particular. Paul Scarpel, who's a practicing architect here in Bakersfield, who 17 years ago didn't discourage me from coming to Bakersfield, to moving to Bakersfield. I wouldn't say he told me it was a good idea, but he didn't say don't come. So. I want to recognize, and I'm sorry he's not here, he will be here later, but Frank Getzi, who designed this building, and he's on a panel today, but he sold me Richard Neutra's Davis house 16 years ago. And Frank was an incredible steward. I'm going to get choked up. This is horrible. But 16 years ago, Frank sold me the house, and he had been an incredible steward of this property. Having grown up in Europe, gone to school in Switzerland, studied with Neutra while he was a young boy in Europe, and then of all places, moving to Bakersfield and then buying this house in '59. He improved the house with some really sensitive and appropriate additions, and I really thank Frank from the bottom of my heart, because he's at least 50% responsible for this thing even happening. Without Frank and his stewardship, I wouldn't have the home, and wouldn't have the audience for this. So thanks, Frank. Another BFGC alumnus was a dear, dear friend of mine who's unfortunately no longer with us. It was Lou Walters. And Lou worked for many local firms in town, but his fondest memories were working, I see Bob nodding your head, his fondest memories were as a young man working closely with Whitney Bigger. And he shared lots of anecdotes about Whitney and lots of stories about the office, and provided a lot of the materials that are in the exhibition. Whitney, as his daughters who are here will attest to, was a true minimalist and didn't keep anything. So fortunately, Lou, when he was told to take these materials out to the incinerator and burn them, disobeyed Whitney and took the materials to his car and took them home. So, and we're the beneficiaries of that. And last but not least, I want to thank Patricia Letty. Patricia is at home today, but she's just been such a great person to our family. She was the original client with Richard Neutra almost 60 years ago, actually more than 60 years ago, and has been so generous with this community for us to see her house, hear the stories not only of her and Richard Neutra, but her and Martha Graham, her and Jackson Pollock, her and it goes on and on and on. And she's such a gem. And so I want to thank her and her generosity and her family for their generosity. They're here today. Okay, I think I'm done with the crying part, but maybe. I can't promise that. But believe it or not, I came to Bakersfield 17 years ago, in large part because of the rich modernist architecture that's here and in great shape. And it certainly has been one of the best decisions of my life. Can I see a show of hands of how many architects we have here today? That's fantastic. Fantastic. So our hope is by promoting historical architecture, it may make your current clients listen to you just a little better, allow you to create better projects that future generations will be celebrating as well. So thank you for the work that you guys do. So, and while we're celebrating architecture and architects that created it, the unsung heroes are the clients, good clients. The Ablins, Robin's here today, the Dabbs, the Sadarskis, the Elliots, and the Fricks, just to name a few of the local clients that were really great in doing this. They took a chance to create homes that weren't common, that maybe the neighbors really didn't like, they didn't understand, and in many cases, maybe they were even mocked for building these places, but the clients did them anyway. And often, those are the people that get lost in this conversation. So here's to the clients that did this, and then that segues into the current owners. I want to recognize Tim and Denise Brandon, who have one of the homes today, and Anthony and Faith Meyer. I hope they're here today. Maybe not. They're staying at home protecting their house before people descend on it. Steve and Karen Schuett, who have a really fine Whitney Bigger home, and Sean McNally, and also the owner of the Ablin House. They're faced with the responsibility of keeping these notable and unique buildings functioning for today's needs while keeping the spirit and integrity of the original home, and I really do applaud them for that. And so, I don't go on and on and on and I cry again. Thank you all for being here and contributing to make this day possible. And I hope you have a really fun and inspiring day. Thank you. Sian Winship from the SAH-SCC.
Thank you, David. So can we have our first panelist come up and join me on the stage, please? Take a chair wherever the mics are already on. So welcome, everybody. As I have been introduced, I'm president of the Society of Architectural Historians Southern California chapter. We have lots of members here, and one of our board members who came up from Los Angeles, so we are bringing the LA folks up here to be present today. The name of this panel is called Cullimore Students, and it's a great place to start this conversation because I think you'll see as we go through the conversation about Bakersfield architecture in the 60s will come full circle, and we'll talk about kind of how we get there. But first, let me introduce my fellow panelists here. So I am joined by Christopher Livingston, coordinator for the Historical Research Center housed at the Walter, is it Stern? Stern, okay. Library at Cal State Bakersfield. Wave to the crowd. I'm also joined by two former Cullimore students. Roger Phillips, architect and BHS, Bakersfield High School, class of 1952. Wave to the crowd. And Richard Weigelt, educator and former student of Clarence Cullimore at Bakersfield High School. So I want to set a little bit of the context for the focus of the event today, and certainly for this panel. The first panel is really going to explore one of the key reasons that there was so much good architecture in Bakersfield in the 1960s. And it actually goes back to the 19-teens. Clarence C. Cullimore arrived in Bakersfield to teach at Kern County High School in 1910. He had just recently completed his architecture degree at the University of California. I don't have to say Berkeley because it was the only one at the time, but in case you're not up on your Cal history, that was definitely Berkeley. And his assignment was to teach mechanical drawing in their vocational education program. And what happened is about 2 years after he arrived to teach mechanical drawing, he started an architectural drawing program and an architecture training program. It was one of the most comprehensive and earliest programs of its kind, certainly west of the Rockies. The only one that I've been able to find that predates it is at Los Angeles Polytechnic High School, which was started in 1906. So they beat him out a little bit there. But it was truly a remarkably sophisticated program. And this is just an example of what was being produced by the talented young men of Bakersfield High School in 1916. We don't have a lot of those early drawings, but again, you can see the amazing skill and beauty of this drawing that was inspired by Clarence's teachings. So what would happen was typically the earliest graduates would go on to study architecture in college. And they would typically go to an Ivy League school early on, or then they were going to Berkeley. But in I want to make sure I'm quoting this correctly here, in the 1920s actually, the program started in the teens, but it really flourished in the 20s. There was a program of the School of Architecture at USC. And slowly but surely, the Cullimore students were basically a pipeline going through the USC School of Architecture, such that by 1939, of all the architects that had graduated from the USC School of Architecture, more were practicing in Bakersfield than any other city in California other than Los Angeles. So that's why the legacy of good architecture in Bakersfield starts so early. It's all because of Clarence Cullimore. And we'll talk a little bit later in the program about each generation paying that forward to mentor and train those that came up from behind them. But because these might not be familiar names to you, I just want to share some of the names of the architects that are featured in Rachel's beautiful exhibit and on the home tour today. And again, these were people who trained as students. They may have won the Student Architectural Association prize. They went to college and came back. And they include Robert Eddy, William Painter, J. Warren Wright, Ernest McCoy, Alan Choi, and Clarence Barton Alford. There are many more, but those are just a few of the names that hopefully will become familiar to you during the course of today. The other reason that there's so much good architecture in Bakersfield is that Clarence ran that program from 1910 or 1912 until 1956. Okay? Having that kind of dedication is truly amazing and something I don't believe we'll ever see again in terms of our educational system. But that's an influential reason about why this all came about. And then last, before we start turning it over to the panelists and asking some questions, I want to really acknowledge the groundbreaking work of John Edward Powell. John, you're not in the audience today. You didn't surprise me, did you? Okay. I asked him to come, and he told me he wasn't going to be able to come. But he was researching and writing about Clarence Cullimore as well as LA Polytechnic High School years and years and years ago. And he was also gracious enough to share his work with the work that I was doing in preparing a recent journal article and also preparing for the symposium. So let's give John a round of applause because he started this ball rolling. All right, so I'd like to turn to our Cullimore students and get this ball rolling by asking, maybe Dick, you could start the ball rolling by sharing with us, what was it like to be a student of architecture under Clarence Cullimore?
This is on.
It is.
It is on?
Yeah, you just got to speak into it a little more directly.
Oh, a little bit more.
There you go.
Oh, here we go. I'm Dick Weigelt. I'm a graduate of Bakersfield High School. I came to know Clarence Cullimore in the 1951-52 academic year. I had taken 2 years previous to that what we used to call board drafting. And because I got A's in board drafting, my counselor told me, well, Dick, you really should go into architectural drafting your last 2 years in high school. Well, what did I know? And I'm glad I followed his advice. I did. And I was a student of Clarence Cullimore for 2 years. In those days, we had architectural drafting 2 periods a day over the entire year. And Roger and I did the same thing. We were students of Clarence in those 2 years. Roger is 1 year ahead of me, and I followed him by 1 year. Yeah, and he still, yeah, he looks like it. He still is. Thanks, Dad. I will have to tell you, in those 2 years under Clarence as a student, I really began to think about how lucky I was to have a teacher with that kind of background, to teach me the elements, the fundamentals of architectural drafting. This was all done at Bakersfield High School in the Industrial Arts Department, which is the northernmost building on the campus. It parallels the railroad tracks right there. There were 5 classrooms up there in mechanical drawing, and there were 5 full-time mechanical drawing teachers up there. 5. Today, there's 1, just 1. And that person is only part-time with that assignment. So it was a busy, busy place. When we were doing the ink drawings, and we had to do it the hard way with ink, didn't we? Yeah, we did. When somebody said, "The train is coming, the train is coming," and the trains came through there. And when those trains came through there, our wing of the building shook. And of course, when you're doing ink drawings, you don't shake. you just don't. So that's one of the fond memories. The thing about Clarence that I can remember 68, 69 years ago about him was the fact that he was a no-nonsense kind of person. He treated all of his students very fairly, respected all of us. He would come up and down the aisles. He would lean over our shoulder to see what we were doing. If he didn't say anything, it was fine. If he did say something, it was major. And there were 2 ways to do things in his class. The first way was his way, and we learned that. The second way was his way, and that's the way. And we did that too. So it was a gentleman that, well, I guess I can describe it this way. I didn't understand about his background as such until I started reading more about it after I graduated from college. But it was rare for us as students to have a certified AIA teacher in our classroom as a teacher. And I don't think you probably could even find even a minuscule number of those in this country that had that kind of privilege working under Clarence. I have a book here written by Clarence Cullimore, and it's entitled Old Adobes of Forgotten Fort Tejon. Fort Tejon, way back in the 1850s. He wrote this book in 1941. I went through it. It tells about the historical features of the fort, and it tells also about what the construction activities were like building adobe framed buildings. The barracks of Fort Tejon back in the 1850s were adobe. They were built by adobe. They were built by Indians who knew about adobe, and they were very good masons. They did very well. So anyway, he's got this book. A friend of mine loaned it to me, and I just want to let you know that, yeah, he did right. Clarence did, and a prolific writer. He did a beautiful job on this. I will tell you one short story, and then I'll let you go. Clarence Cullimore had a son, Clarence Cullimore Jr. And Clarence Cullimore Jr. was an architect as well. He was a local architect for years. I met him through a service club organization I belonged to, and I got to know him a little bit. He related a story to me about his dad. His dad, as I think Sian mentioned, was a graduate of UC Berkeley. And in his freshman year, it so happened that the big 1906 earthquake in San Francisco took place. Clarence was a freshman at UC Berkeley. He was in the ROTC program. And part of his curriculum was to understand and work with dynamite. So when the earthquake took place, the earthquake did a lot of damage, but you know what took even more damage? The fires. So what he was contacted along with a few of his other cohorts, young people. They went over to San Francisco with their dynamite, and they dynamited a lot of buildings that were in line to go down through fire to create a fire break. And that was the responsibility. Clarence was one of those who went and worked with dynamite in the '06 earthquake, and I thought that was really kind of interesting. His son, Clarence Cullimore Jr., related a wonderful story about that. We were all standing around there just listening to him because he was just rattling that off like it was yesterday. So anyway, I'm privileged to have known him, to have worked under him. I'm not an architect. I didn't go that way. I'm a teacher. I went that way, and I taught mechanical drawing for years in the Kern High School district, going forward to other things at Cal State Bakersfield. So anyway, thank you for Sian for inviting me
Thank you,
to
Dick.
be here and remembering some of the things that I'd almost forgotten
Wonderful.
down through the years.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank
it's
you.
Fantastic. So one of the things that made Cullimore's program so special and so unusual and of the highest quality is that he very quickly incorporated the ideas of design competitions. So a design problem would be presented, say, an upscale house on the east side, perhaps a library, different types of buildings. And he would allow high schoolers to participate in these design competitions. And they were also sometimes national competitions. So I'm going to turn to Roger, And I'm going to ask Roger what it was like to participate in those competitions and maybe tell a story or two about a national competition that you won through Clarence.
Well, thank you, Sian. First of all, I'd like to thank all the organizations that put this together. And if you ever have an engine that needs a spark plug, there's your spark plug. I can't tell you. I can't tell you what a joy it's been to converse and negotiate with Sian over the telephone for these last some months. But I know many years and many months have gone into this, and the work has been marvelous. The chance to talk about Clarence Cullimore helps substitute for some of the things I feel badly about, and one of them is after I finished college, and even through college, I had limited contact with Clarence, and I think it was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made, because if anybody deserved constant feedback and thanks for what he's done for not only me, but for literally generations of people, you know, it's just hard to believe. And I hope today to share some of my joy and appreciation for Clarence. When I was a freshman in high school, some teacher said they thought I should become an attorney because of my argumentative nature. But I met Lowell Nelson, who was one of the mechanical drawing teachers there, and Lowell thought that I might be interested in architecture and that I should pursue that rather than the law. And rightly or wrongly, I took his advice, and Lowell arranged one day before after class to introduce me to Clarence, and Clarence encouraged me to make that change as well. And it's one of the best decisions and opportunities that I've ever had in my life. And it's helped me and guided me in parallel ways, not just in architecture, but some parallel ways. The competitions that they sponsored were marvelous. At the time, I don't know about later, but at that time, the Eagles Lodge was the sponsor of these competitions. And each year they would set up, Clarence would set up a mythical design problem for the students to design. The idea that they would design, they would draw working drawings and build a model, which was kind of interesting because this, in my third year at Bakersfield High, the project was to design a city hall. And that's a bit of a challenge for a third-year high school student. And nonetheless, I went through and we did the plans and made the models. And I don't even remember whether I got an award or not. But the next year, it was to design a custom house, which seemed much more accessible as a thing to do. And I pursued that. And it was thrilling because, like you say, Clarence would come down the aisle and look over your shoulder, and he had kind of a hidden sense of humor. He was very stern. Sometimes he'd have his hand in his pocket, but he would say a few words, and you better listen, or you're going to get a lesson. And one time, this happened after class, but I had said something foolish about design, about maybe how simple it was, and he said, that's just the icing on the cake. He says, the cake has a whole lot of other stuff in it than just the design on the outside. And he said, like that clock. I said, what clock? And he said, on the wall. And I said, well, it was a clock on the wall. He said, how do you suppose it got there? Well, put it up. And he said, well, who decided where? Why wasn't that clock over here? And I said, well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. And he kept chasing me around the room with this clock. Wanted to know why it wasn't 3 feet off the floor, and I never had a good answer for any of these. Except he finally said that that architecture was not only the exterior design, but it was all the parts that went into it. And even if the things that you didn't do, you were responsible for hiring engineers, electrical engineers, structural engineers, to do all this thing that would say such and such a clock. Was it regular Arabic numerals or Roman numerals on the clock? And so he kind of beat me up with that clock on the wall. But it kept me thinking, I haven't even thought about this until this whole thing came up. And by the way, she promised that if we had this early morning presentation, there would be at least as many people in the audience as there were on the panel. and true to your word, here we all are. And again, I thank her. But the competition, the second year, we prepared it. They had the judging, and after the judging, I got second place in that award. And the judges for that panel were Wright, Metcalf, Parsons, Eddy, Bigger, all the architects there who were there. Those were the judges for this competition. And I came in second, and Clarence told me afterwards, he said, there was one holdout for you to be first, not second, and that was Whit Bigger. And this was my last year of school, and so shortly after graduating, I got a call from Clarence saying that I would get a call from Whit Bigger, who wanted to hire a beginning architectural draftsman. And I did get the call, and I did go to work in that summer of '52, just before the earthquake. So that was the beginning of one whole another story about ricocheting off of Clarence Cullimore. So anyhow, unbeknownst to me, I got a call in, I think, July of that summer after graduating, and it was Western Union calling. And they said, I have a telegram for Roger Phillips. And I'd heard of telegrams, but I never sent one or received one. And she said, you want me to read it to you, or you want to pick it up? I said, well, read it to me, and then I'll come and pick it up. So she read it, says, congratulations, you have been awarded first prize in the architectural design and model competition at the Ford Industrial Arts Award, which was $100 cash and a 5-day expense-paid trip to Detroit for you and your instructor. And so I said, well, thank you very much. And I was certain that there was something fraudulent about this. I mean, I never heard of the Ford Industrial Arts Awards program, let alone that my project and the other one that got first place in the logo contest was also entered into this. And so they said, you can pick your telegram up down at Western Union's office downtown. So I got in my car, I went downtown and I parked, and I thought, no, this isn't real. My friends are hiding behind the cars or bushes. And when I asked her, they're going to jump out and say, ha, we got you. But anyhow, I went in and I said, I'm going to have a telegram for Roger Phillips. And she gave me this bloody thing. You know, it's a kind of yellowish paper with strips of paper glued on. That was before computers and all that stuff. But anyhow, you could have knocked me over with a feather. But anyhow, one thing led to another. This thing was organized. We got together with Clarence. We got our tickets. We went out to the airport and got on a magnificent United Airlines DC-3 holding all of 21 passengers. And then we took off and went to LA, and then we got on a bigger plane and we went to Chicago, and we got there early in the morning. We had the whole day in Chicago, running around to the museums and various places. There was a morning radio show, a breakfast club of some sort, and it was at the pump room at whatever hotel that was in. And so we were sitting there, and we were interviewed on the radio. And then at 7 o'clock, we got our flight to Detroit. And we had gotten notice that the Dearborn Inn in Dearborn, where they took VIPs to stay, that they were overbooked and we had to stay in Detroit that first night. And we should go to the Statler Hotel. Now Statler was the Hilton of the day. It was a lovely spot, and Detroit was at the peak of its elegance. It was really a marvelous, rich city. So they said, you just charge everything to your room. So that was a delight for a 17-year-old. But anyhow, in the morning, some Ford people came and picked us up, took us to the airport, and we flew to Detroit. And then for the next 3.5 days, we did everything you could possibly do legally in Detroit. At that time, they were really centered on their River Rouge plant, which was a fantastic facility. The steel for their cars came in on ore ships in the river and unloaded in their foundries, and they made this steel right on the site. And then they moved it on to the next. They had a factory, they made the paint, they made glass, and they took us through absolutely everything, through the design studios. We went for a ride on the test track, and then they hauled us all over that part of Michigan. We went to the Michigan football game. We had steaks at every conceivable kind of restaurant, and you still can't get steaks like that here. But in any case, there were 30 other winners in other categories. So one person made an aluminum boat, somebody else made, in all these different categories. So it was a chance to really get to know other people in other trades. One of which was a young guy from Brooklyn who had a brogue. I could hardly understand him, and he could probably not understand me. But we called a cab, and 4 of us went into Detroit one night, and we went to the Gaiety Burlesque. That was a chain like Warner Brothers, but they put on burlesque shows in the various cities. We got back to the Dearborn Inn, and the cab driver wanted to be paid. And this Brooklyn guy says, well, Ford has to pay for this. And so the cab is waiting, and we're all waiting. He goes in and cajoles the person at the desk in the hotel to give him the money to pay for the cab that we had, that we used. So it was an education in lots and lots of different ways. But it was a chance to really get to know Clarence like I never would have known him otherwise, and he was a person of great good humor. But after getting back, I worked that summer for Whitbeer, and I stayed on in the fall semester. And I was going to stay for the whole year and then maybe go to Bakersfield College. But anyhow, we got a letter due to Clarence Cullimore asking for it, saying that in the College of Architecture, you better do all 4 or 5 years there. Don't do 2 years beforehand. So at the last minute, in the end of September, decided that I would try to transfer to start at Berkeley in February. Now that's not a very long time, but with Clarence's help, he wrote a letter to the director of admissions at UC Berkeley, who happened to be his classmate when he was at Berkeley, saying that he thought it would be real nice if I could be admitted, a couple months later. He got less, the principal's name was Hodge, I don't remember, to write a letter from the principal of the school to the College of Architecture, suggesting that it would be good if I could get in right away. Maybe they want to get rid of me, but in any case, I had a letter from Chet James, the director of the Public Works Department, where I had worked one summer. I had a letter from Whitney Bigger, all to the UC Berkeley admissions on October 6th. On October 16th, from the admissions department, I got an acceptance letter. And all I had to do was pay the semester tuition, which then was $21. So none of this $500,000 to corrupt the colleges to get you in. But again, Clarence was behind every one of those letters, and it was because of Clarence that it got in when I did, and all that has followed in my life is due to that. And one little parallel course, I'll take just another minute. In his drafting class, I met Dave Cross. He was a year behind me in Dick's class, and became good friends with David. And after college, I went to Santa Barbara for a year, but Whit asked me to come back, and when I came back to his office in '59, Dave Cross was working there. And soon after, Dave was married, and he and his wife rented a new apartment in a chain on Rio Road that was just a couple blocks from the office. I was living north of the river, long way away, and like being in Delano almost. And he and his wife said, there's one more apartment here that's empty. Why don't you move here? And I said, well, I don't feel like it, Maria. But they encouraged me to move there. And there's 12 units, 6 on either side of a driveway, symmetrical. And I hadn't been there more than a month or 6 weeks when the one apartment that was being held for someone else became vacant. And this lovely young lady from Connecticut who was coming to Bakersfield to teach moved in right across from me, about half the distance from here to that back wall. And that's my wife, Diana. And none of that would have happened if Dave Cross hadn't got me to move. And then shortly after that, after we met in September, we were engaged in October to be married in June. David and his wife wanted to move from the apartment, and they found some new houses being built out south of town. And came to me and said, you really ought to get one of these new houses. And I said, well, no, we don't want to get it. I'm not even married yet. He says, yeah, but the down payment is only $475. And that was probably the best thing, the second best thing I've ever done, because that was my toehold in the housing market, which I've ridden ever since, that magnificent animal. So if it was not for Dave, and he continued to be a good friend, but if he hadn't insisted on my taking that apartment, I wouldn't have met my wife. And if he had insisted that we buy one of those houses, we never would have gotten in the housing market. Probably would still be renting somewhere. But anyhow, in '64, I was asked to come back to Santa Barbara, where I've had a very satisfactory career in architecture, and I can't tell you, there just aren't words to describe how much all of it was due to Clarence Cullimore. And any number of points, if he hadn't done or said or pushed or encouraged, none of this, for me, would have ever happened. And when I think that I was only under his direct influence for a couple of years, and if I think of how many hundreds of other people profited, literally, and benefited from his marvelous attention and the seriousness of which he took architecture and tried to instill that in you and make you go further than you otherwise may have gone. And I cannot ever overstate what I owe to Clarence Cullimore.
Thank you,
And I
Roger.
thank you for this opportunity.
So I do want to leave some time for questions from the audience, but before we do that, I want to acknowledge that these remarkable images, I hope you figured out and connected the dots, that was Roger Phillips then, and that's Roger Phillips now, are all part of the Clarence Cullimore collection at Cal State Bakersfield. And so, Chris, I wanted to ask you, just briefly, what has struck you most about Clarence Cullimore as you've cataloged and studied these materials? What is it from your perspective?
Can everybody hear me? So when we took the collection in 2015, I've been processing it ever since, and every time I open a box, it sets me back 6 months. So that's how rich this collection is, and it's kind of a misnomer. It's not just architectural papers. And when I think of Clarence Cullimore, I think of him as a community builder. He was an educator, he was a father, he was a grandfather. He built a sense of community here. He was the president of the Kern County Musical Association. He brought in talent such as Lily Pons and Rachmaninoff to Bakersfield to perform for people here in town. He was the driving force in getting Fort Tejon recognized as a state park. In fact, if you go on to, if you Google California Light and Sound, you can see some video that we have of him taking students up to Fort Tejon in the 30s. So he truly is a Renaissance man. He was a writer. He wrote numerous articles, and not just the 2 books. He also dabbled in fiction as well. He had ties. Actually, he was president of the Kern County Historical Society at one time. He wrote about Father Garces. He was a world traveler. He went to every country you can think of, and I think the bottom line, though, that I through his papers and through his letters, was that he truly loved his son. You could see that expressed in his writing. So it's a rich collection. Any scholars that are looking to research it, it's begging to be researched. We've already had Sian, tap into it, and so.
Well, thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that. So I do want to open it up for questions, and then, of course, there'll be opportunities during the break for you to go up and chat with them individually. But in the interest of equal time, I wanted to share this picture of Dick Weigelt. This happened to be the yearbook that I was using online to study this particular year. And it just so happened that the Student Architectural Association photo, which is what you have here, whoever he autographed this to, he circled himself and put me. So there he is, right there, ladies and gentlemen.
I was in the last row, far left, last row.
So we're just going to have time for maybe 2 quick questions, but let's go here.
I would like to state this. My name is Bob Barner, architect. I was part of the firm in San Luis Obispo, Rod Levine, one of my ex-partners, worked for Clarence Cullimore here in Bakersfield. That's where he got his start. And he was one excellent person, Rod, and he owed that a lot to Clarence. So his talent spread more than just Bakersfield, as you well know.
Excellent. Another question here? Thank you so much, Bob. Yes, sir, in the back. We'll let Sally Jesse Raphael hand you the microphone.
Dick, I'm Rob Negrini. I'm a geology and physics professor at Cal State Bakersfield, and the earthquake in Fort Tejon in 1857 was arguably larger than the San Francisco earthquake. How did that barracks fare? The Adobe barracks.
It didn't, relatively. It was severely damaged. It was. And they had to come back to fix it up as to what it was prior to that quake. There was a major quake here in California. Yes, that is true. And they used Adobe. If you go to Fort Tejon now, and you can see the remnants of the 2 barrack buildings, you'll notice that the clay material used as for the wall structure was 2 different colors. One was the original brick, the other one was the aftermath brick that they put in the aftermath of the quake. So it's an interesting place to visit. It really is. But thank you for your comment. Yeah, that was a major quake. It really was.
One more question and then we'll close. Right there, man with cap.
Excuse me. I'm Rob Parsons. I just wondered if either of the drillers might have had my father, who taught drafting at BHS from 1948 on.
Was that Bob Parsons?
That's right.
That's right. Yes.
It's
Nice to meet you.
It's a small world. So I just want to close this panel by kind of talking about Clarence. And one of the other remarkable things about Clarence Cullimore is that, and I think you both touched on it, but he was not only a member of the American Institute of Architects, he was elevated to be a fellow. Now, for those of you who are maybe not familiar with fellowship, this is quite a high honor. Certainly a very relatively small percentage of people who actually even apply for fellowship are elevated to fellowship. And what's interesting, and just a tinge of sadness for me, is that Clarence was elevated to fellowship for his work in Adobe construction methods and basically for his construction methods service. He wasn't honored at all for being an educator. That's not even part of his application, which I think in some regards just tells you how humble he was about his own achievements. And if there's anything I'd like to do with this panel and going forward is really elevate that aspect of his career. And I think that what is really truly remarkable is the two Cullimore students that we have today exemplify both aspects of Cullimore, the architect and the educator. So with that, we're going to close. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and I just ask that you come back in 15 minutes, and we're going to start right on time. So thank you very much.